My name is Zena Karam. I am the bureau chief for the AP in Beirut. I will be talking to you today a little bit about the challenges of covering the Middle East these days. You know, whether it's in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, or Saudi Arabia or Libya, journalists today face big challenges and obstacles, including lack of access, extreme violence, no freedom of movement, and so on. My colleague Aya Batrawi, who's just back from a one-month reporting trip in Saudi Arabia, will talk to you a little bit about the challenges of covering the Gulf. I will talk more about the specific challenges of covering the Syrian conflict for the past 4 years. Behind me, you are seeing some pictures taken by AP photographers around the Middle East. As you can see, they are very powerful images, and these photos specifically were taken, I believe, in 2012 and 2013, and AP won a Pulitzer Prize for these Syria photos. You will see also some really powerful images, more recent images from Tikrit, where we had recently an AP crew embedded with the Iraqi forces as they were liberating the city from Islamic State militants. Now, these photos are an example of what photographers and reporters can do when they are on the ground inside the country, as reporters should be. But unfortunately, the harsh reality these days is that often we are not able to be there because the risk of being in some of these places has become incredibly big. When we talk about Syria, it's not only just become the most dangerous country on earth for journalists, but we have also faced issues of access and freedom of movement right from the beginning. I myself was evicted from Damascus in March 2011 as I was reporting on the first protests that happened there. I was not the only one. Eventually, the Syrian government expelled all journalists working for international media organizations. I have been able to go back there once or twice since then, and we send crews to Damascus regularly whenever we do get government permits. But it's always very difficult. It's a challenge reporting from there because journalists need to be accompanied by government minders all the time. And we don't have the freedom to go wherever we want. And when you have a minder with you, people do not feel comfortable saying what they really feel or think. So that's always problematic. AP was also sending crews to northern Syria, to rebel territory. Unfortunately, we have had to stop that for now because journalists themselves have become a target. We have not been able to send anyone there since the summer of 2013, when the kidnappings by the Islamic State group started, the kidnapping and killings of journalists. So on the one hand, you have the Syrian government, which discourages journalists from being there, and on the other side, you have the Islamic State group. And with the emergence of that group in Syria and Iraq, you have entire areas that are completely closed off to journalists. So that presents reporters, including AP, with really a unique situation of trying to find other ways to cover the news. So you might ask, how do we cover the news then in a situation like that? The answer is in a variety of ways. There are still ways that we can report the news. We can talk to people inside Syria on the phone, on Skype. We are present on the Turkish-Syria border, And it's possible to talk to people who go back and forth between ISIS territory, people who come out of Aleppo. You can talk to refugees, you can talk to wounded civilians and rebels. So it's possible to piece together a picture of what's happening. It's not ideal, but you do the best you can. And it used to be that in the old days, if the media was not present to cover an event, then it was almost like it never happened. But thankfully, these days, there's something called social media. Basically, everyone who has a smartphone and an internet connection can act as a journalist, and this is what we call citizen journalists. And it is up to us as AP to go through that content on social media, and we use it as a means to supplement our own reporting, but we place great importance on the vetting and verification of that content before we publish it ourselves. And I think Syria is unique in that sense because of the sheer amount of videos, of amateur videos coming out of the country. And it has played a crucial role in the coverage of the country. For example, there were huge events such as the massacres, the Hula massacre, the chemical weapons attack, whereby the world first heard that there was something so big happening in Syria from a tweet, followed by a photo, and then the videos started coming out. So really, it's a very important tool for anyone covering Syria. But as many of you may know, there are a lot of pitfalls. There is so much misinformation, so much propaganda, and so much hoax when it comes to Syria. And I will show you some examples of fake videos that were picked up by other news organizations. They were all over the internet, but they turned out to be hoax. This video appeared recently on the internet. It purports to show a Syrian child rescuing another child under gunfire. As you can see, it's a very powerful video, and it was picked up by a lot of media organizations. And we ourselves came under pressure to use it because it's so powerful. But we spent hours, if not days, trying to verify this video, trying to reach the source, trying to find out who took that video, where it was taken, anything that would shed more light on the situation. But we were not able to. And so, of course, we didn't run with it. And then a few days later, it emerged that this video was shot at a set in Malta by a Norwegian director who simply wanted to attract attention to the plight of children in conflict zones. So that was a fake video. This photo was said to be of a Syrian child sleeping between the graves of his children. It was all over the internet, but there was something staged or strange about it, and it was in fact taken by a Saudi student for an art project. This picture, now this picture, there's actually nothing wrong with this picture. It is authentic, but the way it was presented, it suggested that this little Syrian boy was fleeing his country and was separated from his parents, suggesting he was lost from his parents. And he was found by UN workers. as we started looking more into this video, then we found another, this photo, sorry. Then we found another photo where when you zoom out, you could see that the child, in fact, was walking a few steps behind lots of other people, including his parents. He was not separated from them. So there are often just nuances that don't work. We have one more video. Some of you may be familiar with that video. It emerged very early on in the Syrian uprising. It purports to show Syrian soldiers burying alive a Syrian rebel. You can see here. But as we started investigating this video, we felt really uncomfortable. It felt somehow staged. The accents were not quite right. And we decided that we were not comfortable enough to run with it, and it was a hoax video. The whole thing was staged. It was not authentic. So these are really just some of the examples of the huge amount of misinformation and hoax going around, and it gives you an idea of the importance of what we do in vetting and verifying these videos before we actually publish them ourselves. I just want to say that we don't always have the luxury to spend so much time trying to verify content, because often we work with breaking news. For example, you have the videos showing ISIS militants beheading journalists. We cannot really afford to spend hours trying to verify that, and we couldn't anyway. So we use our news judgment, and we do run with the content, and we say that it's impossible to verify it ourselves. I think that's it. I hope that gives you an idea of what we do, and I'll hand over to Aya.
Okay. Hi, my name is Aya. I'm a journalist here with the Associated Press in Dubai. And prior to my almost 2 years here, I was a correspondent with the AP in Cairo, covering the Egyptian Revolution and Libya and Yemen from there. So when I first moved to Dubai, I wasn't very familiar with the Gulf, and there is obviously a very different set of challenges to reporting in the Gulf than Zaina, my colleague in Beirut, has to face. Obviously, they face a life and death situation in Syria, and they face numerous more challenges. But there are still, of course, obstacles and challenges to covering the Gulf, and one of them is, I think, access to people, access to officials, and also the openness of the Gulf. So one of the things that I like to focus on in the Gulf is coverage of Saudi Arabia. So the first challenge to covering Saudi Arabia is getting there and being there. Sometimes the kingdom is very open and welcoming to journalists, as we've seen in the last few months. And sometimes it's very difficult to go into the kingdom and have access to officials. So simply just being there is challenging. But sometimes when you're actually in the kingdom, you also face a new set of challenges, which is, I think, first starts internally. I think when you go to a country like Saudi Arabia, there's already so many preconceived notions of what is Saudi Arabia. And you really have to go in there as a journalist as much as you can with an open mind and seeing the country from the inside rather than from the outside. And part of that challenge is getting to know people and being able to travel within the country to different regions and seeing that Saudi Arabia is actually quite diverse. And it's actually not always reported in that way. So trying to communicate that to outside readers and also within the kingdom, getting to know people. So one of the questions I always get asked is, do you find it hard to be a woman covering the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia? And my answer to that is, so far, I've found that it's quite a benefit, because half the population may not be accessible to my male colleagues, but are accessible to me, and that is women. So in Saudi Arabia, I have the opportunity to sit with men, but I also have the opportunity to meet with women, who are a very important part of the country. They're half the population. But there are sensitivities. So you can see in this picture, for example, this picture was taken in Jeddah. I was doing a story about female access to sports and sports education, which is restricted in the kingdom. And we couldn't take pictures of women in pants. We couldn't take pictures of women playing sports. It's culturally insensitive to do so, and women would not permit that. So a way to tell that story and illustrate that story was taking pictures of young girls who had not reached puberty age yet, and taking pictures of them playing sports, which actually turned out, I think, to be much more powerful even, because it shows from a young age how much these girls and their parents supported their basketball practice. There's other pictures too, like here you can see as well. This is in Jeddah. So most people don't think of Saudi Arabia as a place that has a basketball court where women can play sports. But here is a great picture that shows and illustrates, I think, a different side to Saudi Arabia than what is normally seen. This story here was about single women in Saudi Arabia. There's a growing number of single women in the country that are remaining single past the age of 30. And it's a very unusual phenomenon in a country where there used to be very early marriage and women would be married in their teens. And now there's a growing number of women entering the workforce, entering university, going on for their higher studies. In fact, there's more women in university in Saudi Arabia than men. And so we had to try and take a picture of women and show, how do you tell that story if a lot of the women I'm interviewing don't want to show their face because of the niqab, the face veil, and the conservative nature of the society there. So one way is to take pictures that illustrate women, but without showing their identity. So in this case, this was a picture taken on the Corniche, or the promenade in Jeddah, by my colleague. And this too is another example of how to sensitively take photos of women without subjecting them to any kind of pressure from their families. This picture, of course, you might recognize this mosque. It's in Mecca. It's the Grand Mosque, Masjid al-Haram. And this shows, for example, just a snapshot of the segregation that's in the kingdom between men and women. So it shows women in the back and men in the front. And again, you can't really see any of the women's faces, and it's a nice way to tell that story. This here is a photo I took also in Mecca on the great marble entrance to the mosque, if you've ever had the chance to go there. And she clearly saw me taking the photo. She was okay with it, but you can just see the eyes. So I think you might not be able to identify her otherwise. At Princess Noura University, one of the largest female universities in the world, was recently opened and inaugurated in Riyadh. And in Riyadh, it's very difficult to take pictures of women, even more so than Jeddah, and which is on the western coast. So in Riyadh, this university here is women's only. And so women really let loose, and they take off their scarf, and they take off their black abayas, and it's women among women. So it was really tricky to try and take pictures of the campus in a way that doesn't offend the women that are studying there. And so one way is just to go far enough away where people can take, I guess a snapshot. You can see that there's a monorail or a metro that runs through the university. You can see someone standing, but you really can't see any distinct features. So I would say that being a woman has actually been, so far has worked to my advantage. I think being open-minded and covering the country in a way that doesn't make assumptions and doesn't try to back up assumptions, but really goes in there trying to meet with people and talk to people and really be open and understanding the religious importance of Islam in the country, and also and not going in there, I think, with any attempt to back up my predispositions, but really trying as much as possible to learn from scratch and being open to information and ideas. So I would say that sometimes as reporters in the Middle East, we do get a complete picture from where we are. And sometimes the picture is missing, and we have to try as much as possible with our news judgment to overcome the obstacles or the dangers, and really try as best as possible to deliver a story that informs readers, but also builds the trust of the people that we're interviewing and we're talking to, and carries their words, their quotes as accurately and fairly as possible. So I would say that our mission is really to connect the dots, and the reward of that in the end is better than anything, being able to get feedback from readers or other colleagues in the business saying, you know, I learned something new from that story, I feel like I understand people better. And I think that's really the reward at the end of all the challenges. Thank you. So does anybody want to ask us any questions?
I'd like to thank you very much for this presentation that shows tough coverage under wartime circumstances and strict social taboos. Just wanted a question, please, on how you verify reporting coming from citizen journalists. I mean, what kind of measures do you follow? And the other point has to do with the hoax clips and images that you showed. Well, actually, I don't think that these are hoax images. I mean, just the way that social media users interpreted them. It's not because that Norwegian producer, for example, did not mean to stage something hoax. He just wanted to cast light on something real that was happening, but social media users picked that, distorted the intention, and circulated that. And this brings me to my next question, and that is, as a reporter, what is it that you can do to make sure that social media is actually presenting the truth? I mean, it's not misleading you when you want to use this or that story from this or that social media network. Thank you very much.
Well, yes, I mean, some of it is hoax, but some of it is also just misinformation. It's people putting out information that's false, regardless of the intention. As to how we verify our content, we have various ways. First of all, the people who are working on the Syria story, they are experienced journalists, many of whom have been to Syria and are familiar with the places and with the accents and with that kind of thing. We also have a social media unit in our offices in London that helps us vet these videos. We always try to make. We try to make sure that any video that we pick up from social media aligns with our own reporting. For example, if it's a video about, I don't know, bombing in Aleppo, let's say, then we make sure that we are getting the same kind of information from our own sources about the bombing. And we always try to reach the source of the video, the person who shot that video. We make contact, we try to talk to them to find out more about the circumstances, how the video was shot and where and so on. And you're welcome. Yes?
There's a question here.
Do I stand up? Okay, this one's for Aya. In the past few years that you've worked in the Gulf, do you notice that access has been more open or closed or more or less the same in the past few years that you've been here?
I've been in the Gulf for 2 years, so I came to Dubai after the Arab Spring. And so I can't compare it to what it was before the Arab Spring. But I definitely feel that there's been a sort of snapback in some regards, a fear, a concern, an anxiety of being too open, of too quick of change. I think in Saudi Arabia we've seen a lot of reforms under King Abdullah. I don't know if we can expect those same reforms, for example, now. The kingdom, for example, is at war in Yemen. But I think that the region and the Gulf in general is slowly becoming more open to foreigners, to the press. The internet has definitely changed the way that young Arabs receive their news, and I think state governments realize that they cannot rely on state press anymore to tell readers what to think or what's happening. And I think the access to the internet and satellite news channels has forced a more open society to some extent. Although one thing I think all journalists in the region would appreciate more of would be government census, things that are more public, studies on the society, on poverty, on population levels, literacy levels, that kind of thing in the Gulf is not made public, and I don't even know if those studies happen. And it's one of the only regions in the world left where we still don't have access to basic information like that. So in some regards, it's become more open, I feel, in the last 2 years, and in some regards, I think there's still some work to be done. Maha.
Good morning. Hi, Aya. Hi, Zaina. Happy to be here. I did a story and interview. My name is Maha Akil, by the way. I'm Director of Information Department at the Organization of Islamic Conference, and I had the chance to interview the Secretary General who spoke yesterday. Anyways, my question is, do you feel that sometimes the head office or the main office of AP pushes you to cover Saudi Arabia issues or Gulf issues from a certain angle and really not be aware of other issues that are important or the changes that are happening on the ground, and that you have to convince them that no, there are other issues that need to be covered, or certain angles of a story that needs to be seen from a wider perspective rather than the typical way of covering issues in the Gulf?
I don't know if everyone heard, but Mrs. Maha Akil is the head of the media for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, and she helped give the AP and organize for the AP the first interview with the new chief of the OIC. So thank you for that again. I'll answer, and I'm sure Zainab too can answer that. Well, my bosses from New York are here, so no, but with all honesty, the AP, one of the great things about working with the AP is they really do give a lot of deference to the reporters on the ground, because the assumption is correct that we know the story, our nose is to the ground more, and we know what's happening, and we can sense where the story is. So actually, it really is our job to come up with the story ideas and pitch them to New York rather than the other way around. You don't want to get an email from New York telling you to do a story. It means that you may be missing something. So the preference is always to the journalists to come up with those story ideas and the angles for them as well. And it's a very nice relationship between the editors and the journalists, because the editors usually have an outside view, and they can tell you where you may have missed explaining something, or where I took something for granted as knowledge to the reader. So I don't feel on the Gulf that there's any pressure from New York or the top of AP at all. In fact, I come up with the story ideas, and I come up with the interviews, and I write the story from A to Z, and it's really a team effort that goes on behind the scenes, and in the end you might only see my name on the story, but there's a lot of work that goes into it from a lot of people who don't get credit for it in publication, but it's a relationship. I don't know if you wanted to answer that too.
No, I agree completely. It's, I mean, of course, there's always discussions going on, there's brainstorming, talking about stories, but ultimately it's the people on the ground who come up with story ideas and execute them. And you know, in cases like in Syria, when there's doubts about the veracity of something or the other, then usually they rely on our good sense and news judgment because we are there and we know the story.
Are
Any
there
other
any
questions?
other questions? Feel free to ask. No? Okay. Do you want to say the closing anything? Well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.